questions, especially
This is being live streamed on Facebook, so you can watch yourself back on there. In the meantime, if I could just ask everyone in the audience just to pay respect to the panel and just give them their chance to speak. You will get a chance to ask questions after.
Of Portsmouth, the University of Portsmouth's Student Union. So they'll be making their own cases to you tonight, and with that, I'm going to open it up to the four-side to make their opening statements.
Rock and roll. Good evening, everybody. My name is Claire Udy, and I'm a mature student here at the University of Portsmouth. I'm going to read you my statement that I submitted online, just in case you haven't read it. There'll be a lot of people watching tonight that may have not engaged online yet, so I just want to reaffirm what I said because it's pretty good. They say that strength lies within a union, and that is especially true with the National Union of Students. A true political vessel that has not only stood up for your rights time and time again, but also for those who may not have a voice. The NUS has been at the forefront of social, political and global change for many years. Did you know that the reason that students do not pay for council tax is because of the NUS? Or that the young person's rail card was created out of dialogue between National Rail and the NUS? Or that you can get a postgraduate loan if you're under 30 years old because of the NUS working with a number of partners? Or even that you can get your deposit back from your landlord much more easily because the NUS put a great deal of help into the housing bill. The NUS has also been at the helm of protest movements in the UK since the late 1960s. They stood against the Vietnam War, and they were instrumental in the huge anti-apartheid movement of the 1980s. The NUS continued lobbying eventually caused Barclays Bank to withdraw their investment and funding of the brutal South African regime. More recently, the NUS has come out in full support of the Youth Strike for Climate movement, which will see thousands of students take place on the streets tomorrow, in fact, in protest of the impending climate catastrophe and the government's inability to act. Unfortunately, as we see universities under extreme pressure to succumb to the free market, students are starting to be seen as statistics and numbers and not as individuals. The NUS exists to uphold your rights and campaign on issues that matter to you. The NUS is still holding those MPs to account who voted for a tuition fee rise in 2010, those who abolished maintenance grants and the NHS bursary. The NHS will continue to hold to account these, and like for many of us from a low-income background, will be graduating, like me this year, with at least £56,000 worth of debt. In short, the NUS stands up for all of us, from the student who grew up in poverty, who never thought they'd make it here, or the foreign student who spent their childhood in a refugee camp. This union's liberation campaigns work on behalf of all of us to maintain inclusion and diversity within our unions, and those posts are greatly at threat right now. A union is only as strong as its members and its affiliations, and every member has the ability to influence policy and decisions. So why be part of the 5% who aren't affiliated and make it work even harder for our voices to be heard? Let's stay with the majority and work together. Thank you.
Okay, and Ali, if you'd also like to give your 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you guys for having me. My name is Ali Milani. I'm the Vice President, Union Development for the National Union of Students. And it's great to visit Portsmouth again. I had the privilege to come down last year and meet the officers and be shown around the union and see some of the incredible work that the student union here does. And it's great to come back. I have had the privilege of being in the student movement for 6 years now. So often when I go on campuses, I say I'm a little bit like a doctor. When it comes to the student movement, I've pretty much seen it all. I've been a sabbatical officer for 2 years at Brunel Students' Union. I've spent 2 years on NUS's NEC. And for the last 2 years, I've been privileged to serve as the Vice President Union Development. And often I will do the affiliation referendums around the country. I will talk to students, whether it has been called or it's part of the natural progression of democracy within a student union. And what I find most powerful and most poignant, and the thing that connects a thread amongst students, regardless of what campus they're on, what political leanings they're in, or the style and makeup of their student union, is the idea of a national union as just that, an idea. NUS was created in 1922. We're now approaching our 100th birthday. And it was created in really a simple idea of connecting students from across Europe. And I think that spirit exists today, especially today, as we sit and wait for whatever Brexit vote might come out of Parliament. It's particularly important today as it ever is. So I want to briefly talk about the idea of a national union of students as a collective. So not NUS as it exists, but NUS as an idea. We represent the views of students across the UK, 7 million students, both in further and higher education, to the sector, so to places like Universities UK, to charity and third sectors, as well as to government and to parliaments, both here and in Europe and abroad. And that's important because I think often, and specifically with the political climate now, we see people retreating inwards. We see people of all societies, whether it's in mainstream politics or in the student politics, are retreating inwards, of disaffiliating or withdrawing or exiting in times of political uncertainty and difficulty. And what I would urge is that the greatest power students have when it comes to negotiating with governments, negotiating with international institutions, and to the sector, is to stay together, is to speak as one voice, is to speak through their national union. And so while I am sure there will be many views on NUS and individual policies and politics and incidents, what's most important is the idea of a national union of students as a collective group, a collective force for students all across the UK. I mean, we heard some of the historic wins and some of the powerful wins of NUS in history, everything from the early years of creating something out of a world war, all the way to the fight against the Vietnam War, through the fight against apartheid in South Africa, and the struggle of the tuition fees being trebled and the maintenance grants gotten rid of. But I want to speak more of today. What is NUS doing today? Because for most of you and for most students, it is about what is happening today. And I will briefly speak about some of the things I am most proud of that our organisation has done. The Black Attainment Gap, for one. I don't know the context in which the Black Attainment Gap exists in Portsmouth, but most institutions have about a 20% difference between black students and their white counterparts in achieving 2-1s and firsts. This was an issue that wasn't at the forefront of HE, wasn't at the forefront of the education system before NUS really championed it. And it was the work of NUS that meant that UUK and government and the sector are now taking this issue seriously. Issues on sexual harassment in the education system. Long before political parties decided to take this issue seriously, the women's campaign in NUS was championing these issues, and now we see it at the mainstream of our political debate, not just in the student movement, but more broadly. Issues of mental health. Before mental health became a mainstream issue on political parties' manifestos, it was NUS and our NUS that was calling for more mental health support on campuses, was running research that showed that 70+% of students experience a mental health crises in their time. So really what I want to say is, yes, NUS can improve. Yes, there are, you may disagree with issues politically, but the collective, that idea that began in 1922 is as important today in 2019. Thank you.
That was 5 minutes exactly. Let's see if the No to NUS side can do the same.
Thank you, Ben. Hi guys, my name's Ronnie. Some of you know me already. I'm quite about on campus quite a bit. I'm just going to start by saying this. The NUS has been in crisis for years now, whether it be from a democratic deficit or whether it be for its finances. It is clear that the NUS no longer represents students, not only across the country, but here in Portsmouth. All 5 sabbatical officers who currently work in the union support leaving the NUS. Now that tells you something. The people at the forefront of our union do not wish to remain a member of the National Union of Students. I have 3 points I'm going to cover, and I will have a little statement to read to you afterwards as well. Our union wastes £50,000 in NUS affiliation fees every year. Now, for those of you members of societies, you'll know that there have been cuts to funding for societies, minibuses, for example, where societies are unable to get their members to events because funding has been cut. Now, what do we get in return for that £50,000? A student discount card you have to pay for. And that brings me on to my second point. The discount card, otherwise known as Totem, is an abject failure within students' unions, and here it took an absolute nosedive. And I'm glad Ali is with us because he's been spearheading this, and maybe he can tell us why last year alone, in this last academic year, 50% of people at this 50% decrease in sales at this union. And I can tell you why. It's because there are alternatives, free alternatives that offer far wider ranges of discounts. Student beans, for example, or uni days. None of these will be new or unheard of to you. But what do we see? We see an organisation that will sell you a card that you have to pay for out of a loan they say they don't want you to have to take out, but they still make you pay for a discount card, even after your union has spent £50,000 on membership, which could otherwise be spent on student societies and getting people to events to engage with other universities. But we cannot do that because we do not have the money to. However, I will move on to my third point, because all of this will be covered later on in the debate, I am sure. Other student unions across the country have disaffiliated. Plymouth, Surrey, Southampton, Newcastle join a list of 13 others who have disaffiliated in the last 4 years alone. That should tell you something. Across the country, we are seeing student unions standing up. This isn't about having a national voice. This is about having a body that says they represent us at a national level, yet consistently fail to do so. I have a statement here from the president of Loughborough University Student Union, and I won't read the whole thing to you, but it will be published in the coming weeks, so please keep an eye out for that. The extract I want to read to you says this: "Until the NUS can return to its primary purpose of student representation and leave irrelevant politics and commercial profitability behind, it is my firm belief that strong unions and their students should have the ability to connect with each other in a more productive way, away from the now restrictive and largely ineffective so-called National Union of Students." That's from Mr. Matheson. He's been president of the Loughborough Students' Union for this academic year. He was there when they disaffiliated in 2016. He has seen firsthand how the National Union of Students will leave you behind, even when you are a member. But that will all be covered later on. So I just want to go over my 3 main points again, just before I run out of time. We are wasting £50,000 a year. Students are not benefiting from that £50,000 a year. The discount card has been an absolute disaster, once again spearheaded by our member of the panel on the opposite side. Free versions are available, and I encourage you all to look at uni days and street beans. And other student unions across the South Coast, who we could join an alliance with, who we already have connections with, we are able to keep these things alive. We are able to have a student voice at a national level. We do not need a bureaucratic body, and effectively, people on the payroll of that bureaucratic body are not going to tell you to leave the bureaucratic body because they know the problems with it, but they won't tell you them. Just like they won't tell you about the alternatives to their discount card, because it's not in their benefit. You have to really question everything Ali is going to say to you, because he's on their payroll. It's in his benefit for us to sit here and pay £50,000 to them a year. But let's also, one question for you before I run out of time. When was the last time any of you heard of anyone from the NUS coming down here? And yes, Ali said he came down here last year. But when did he engage with students? I was here last year, didn't even know anyone had come down. They have a proper democratic deficit. They talk about national politics, yet they can't even organise their own. It's a question you all have to ask. If they can't represent locally, how on earth are they going to do it nationally? I'm just about to run out of time, so I'm going to stop there.
Okay, and the final 5 minutes.
Thank you. So, hi everyone, my name is George. I am one of those sabbatical officers that Ronnie talked about. I'm Vice President for Education and Democracy for this year. So I'm just here to give a sabbatical officer perspective. And it's kind of funny actually, coming into office, I was the only sabbatical officer that wanted to disaffiliate from the NUS. Now, after realising how useless the organisation really is, every single sabbatical officer wants to disaffiliate. And there's a variety of reasons. Firstly, a complete lack of support. We currently experience next to no support. We struggle to get emails out of them. We've had our president send an email very recently. Our VP Welfare sent an email very recently. No response. I've sent an email to one of the vice presidents months and months ago about a question of bursaries at our university, which I'm still waiting on a response to. How are we going to get this more support or any kind of level of support when the NUS is cutting 50% of its staff just to stay afloat because of its own financial ineptness? Totem has been a financial disaster for our union, and in particular, and there is a letter, an open letter going out from students' unions about Totem's social media, which pushes messages promoting and making light of lad culture, sexism, misogyny, and alcohol culture. A lot of these things, all of these things that our union stands against and that we actively campaign against. Yet we are paying £50,000 for Totem and NUS to promote messages that are completely at our own. It makes absolutely no sense. Now this leads me very nicely on to the issues surrounding liberation. Recently, I'm sure some of you might have heard that NUS LGBT campaign recently renewed its motion that gay men do not face oppression. Alongside massive cuts to liberation campaigns, this liberation and welfare argument is obviously no longer valid. NUS is now a regressive organisation that can no longer be the champion of marginalised students. And it's shown this in the past year through the harassment and bullying that its vice presidents and its elected officers have shown towards other elected officers at Students' Union, in particular at the University of West of England, where they tried to introduce a men's officer just to be hounded by NUS elected officials over Twitter, over social media, to the point where that student who I spoke to had to stand down from running in this election to become the next men's officer, simply because he didn't feel like he was able to. NUS tricked us once about their finances, saying that they were fine, signing them off. Obviously, this was not the case, knowing that NUS might even fold in the next few months. Do not let them trick you again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to both sides. We're now going to have a very brief back and forth between both sides for about 5 minutes before we open up to you, ladies and gentlemen, in the audience for your questions. Given that the no side have just delivered their opening statement, I'm just going to throw it back to the yes side for the first period of rebuttal before we come back to the no side again.
I just wanted to bring up about campaigns. You said about women's issues. What did you say, George? Sorry, about domestic violence or feminism or something? Probably about a minute or so ago.
I didn't say either. I said about gay men no longer facing oppression, which the NUS stands.
A bit after that, you said about that you were still campaigning on issues that the NUS was as well, about women and lad culture and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I've been campaigning on those issues too. So when was the last time that you told places like Dirty Disco that they accentuate lad culture? Because I have not seen a single goddamn feminist campaign come out of the SU this year. And I'm part of FemSoc, for crying out loud.
Regardless,
so please tell me about the campaigns you've been doing.
And how will NUS help with those campaigns?
Because we get officers down and we are part of a union. This is the whole thing. I'm part of a union. I'm very, very busy. But I do take my time out to come together with all people. People can drop in and out whenever they want. But you're telling me that from the SU, from your side, you've been running campaigns, but I haven't seen a single goddamn one of them.
Sorry, Claire, we are live on Facebook, so we're just going to have to watch the language there. I'm just going to throw it open to Luke, because we've not actually heard from him just yet.
In response, I've seen these sort of campaigns. They're not as publicised as they should be, but still, if there is an open letter coming from multiple signed universities, starting off with Middlesex, talking about these poor attempts at social media management from Totem and NUS, if we stand behind campaigning for these issues, getting rid of lad culture, and trying to tackle misogyny, we can't stand behind an organisation which posts these things that I'm even hesitant to read, being conscious of my own language for this stream.
Can I just come in on that?
Sure.
So I am as concerned and as embarrassed about some of those tweets, and I'm glad you've raised them up. And as a sabbatical officer, let me apologise to you for those. So they're unacceptable. How Totem works is Totem's similar to Ensley. which NUS created. It's a joint venture. So none of those social media posts that you see are coming out of NUS. They're coming out of a separate organization that NUS has jointly set up. It's not an excuse, but just to let you know, they're not communications that are coming out of NUS directly. And as soon as they came out and they were brought to my attention, immediately we called in a review of all the social media strategies and comms of everyone within Totem. But I just want to talk briefly about these individual political differences. And I heard the open letter, the letter from the is it the president of Loughborough, around the irrelevant politics of NUS. I just think we need to be a little bit careful when we use terms like irrelevant politics, because to some, the issue around sexual harassment in higher and further education is irrelevant to politics. But for all of the people that go through some element of sexual harassment within their time in education, this isn't irrelevant politics. For the black students who face an attainment gap, that will be irrelevant politics to some. But for the vast majority of people who may not get a 2-1 or a first just because of their ethnicity or their background, that's not irrelevant politics. So rather than divulge into the individual politics and policies of NUS, I think what we need to be looking at is, if we disagree with the direction, the vision, and the politics of NUS, there is a national conference, there is a company law meeting, and there are numerous mechanisms in which we can get involved to shape and influence those political spaces. But just because we disagree with the politics doesn't mean we tear down the idea of a collective voice nationally. Right now, what's going on in Parliament is ridiculous. It's laughable by most sensible people in the general public. And people are calling, yes, for a change in government, yes, for changes of leadership, but not for the fall of parliamentary democracy as it stands, not for the fall of our parliaments in general. So I think if you have disagreements with NUS, get involved, change those politics. If the politics is irrelevant to you, get involved and change that. But let's not tear down an organization set up nearly 100 years ago to represent our voices nationally. Because if it were to be torn down and if people were to disaffiliate, I'm afraid the winners would only be the enemies of students, would only be those who want to increase tuition fees, get rid of grants, and really go after turning students into consumers. The only losers here are the students of Portsmouth and students nationally.
Okay, we're going to let the no side respond to that, and then we're going to open up to you, ladies and gentlemen, for questions.
Quite frankly, what you've just heard is this man doing our university a major disservice. We all know that at this university, when you submit a piece of work, it is submitted via an online service which doesn't tell the lecturer, the marker, whose work they are marking. So for him to sit there and say that black students are being discriminated against because of their colour of skin is quite frankly rich, because we know that is not how we operate at this university. I take offence for our lecturers who work so hard, day in and day out, to make sure that they are getting work marked fairly and without discrimination, because quite frankly, they don't know who's submitting the work. So that in itself is a relevant point. Now, what are unions usually established for? They're established to represent people and to protect workers, usually, in this case students. But let's look at the state of the NUS. They have a £12 million black hole in their pension pot. So there are staff who will not, and unless universities, which they will turn around and ask for liabilities at the end of April, do not be in any doubt, at the end of this financial year, they will put those liabilities onto the unions who are still members. Let's not be in any doubt, they are not doing the best for their workers, they are not doing the best, and this isn't about party politics, so I refute everything he says about Parliament and Brexit, because this is not about that, this is a completely separate issue.
Okay, we're going to have to move on to audience questions because we are beginning to run out of time. If you could put your hands up quite high, but wait till the microphone reaches you before you start asking your question, please. Yeah, at the back. And sorry, if you could also try and keep questions brief, because I'm sure there's a lot of you who want to ask them.
Yeah.
The NUS and your argument that it's better to try and change it politically than just leave. As a vice president of the NUS, so I wanted to know your opinion on things like free speech, for example, because obviously that was a massive issue of the NUS. It's actually why I voted for leaving the NUS last time, was because I didn't like the no platform policy. I think debate should be encouraged, not discouraged at universities. And I was just wondering what your view is on that. I know the no platform policy isn't around anymore because the government basically told you to stop doing that. But what does the future look like for free speech in the NUS, basically?
Great question. question, yeah. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so if you guys want to answer that, and then we'll take a question for the no side as well.
Yes. As you said, yes, the interesting thing about reform is it's an opportunity, what reform is, for everybody, in that you're raising your personal view that the issue that you've had is with the no platform policy within NUS. The no platform policy is actually one of the key issues of discussion at this year's national conference. And you know when often people talk about, I didn't catch your name, sorry, what was your name?
So my name is Edward.
Edward, like one of the key things around NUS is often people talk about NUS as if it's this breathing, living thing that walks around and talks and has positions. Most of those positions come out of a national conference, which is the biggest student democratic space in the world. So the NUS No Platform future, the future of No Platform, is being debated at this year's conference. So whether it continues or not isn't my decision. It's not your individual decision. It will be the decision of nearly 1,000 delegates that will be coming to our national conference next year. So it may change in the view in favour of your view, which is it shouldn't exist. It may not. But the great thing about NUS is it's coming to that democratic forum in which it is representative of students, and sabbatical officers will be there also. So the future of that is very much in the hands of our conference democracy. Okay. And that's the opportunity of reform.
We'll take a question specifically for you guys. Are there any questions for the no side now? Yeah, at the back.
To the north, you've said that the NUS has problems within it that need reforming. Wouldn't you agree that it's better to fight for that reform from within the NUS with our elected officers from Portsmouth trying to help to push that reform rather than giving up and leaving?
The NUS has had a number of years to reform, and every single year we hear the same things from the president, whether that be Mali or whether that be Shakira, that this has got to change, this has got to reform. We had Shakira and someone else come down to our Southern Unions network, which is kind of like our mini NUS down here, which we've actually got a lot more out of and we don't pay anything to. But anyway, I digress. They came down and said this exact same stuff. At the end of the day, you can't keep trusting someone that lies to you year in, year out. And I think now we've got to that stage where it's just time to leave. I think it's just time to call it quits. We're not getting anything from that £50,000. We don't know how this reform is going to look. Like I said, they've cut half their staff. If we as sabbatical officers are complaining about the lack of support we're getting with NUS firing at all cylinders at full capacity, I dread to think what kind of support we're going to get with NUS at 50% of that capacity.
Okay, let's move on. If there's any questions for both sides of the panel, or we can go back to questions to one or either. Yeah, you, sir?
Yes.
Sorry, if you just want to wait till the microphone gets to you. Sorry.
Yes. Okay, so I'm in my second year, and I've been part of different societies in both 2 years, whether it be a club or a sport. And all of us, your arguments seem to be based on the 50k that we're channeling into the NUS. Well, are there not any checks and balances, as you've said, to check whether NUS is doing what they're supposed to be doing in regards to this, affiliation with them? And at the same time, it's more like, from what I've seen, there have been campaigns about, lad culture, rape, etc., that sort. And I feel like instead of us, many people have different opinions, but I feel if you're going to say we need to pull out of NUS, are you saying there is already an organization, as you've stated, of Southern universities with a established block already, where all that 50k you're talking about is going to be channeled? Because we could leave, but how are we guaranteed as students that all this money, is going to be channeled into our own union? And at the same time, how are we guaranteed that NUS, from the looks of it, there's been possible flaws over the past years, how are we guaranteed if we do stay, how as students are we going to know about all of this? Because from the looks of it, I've seen some stuff, but 90% of the stuff I've heard today, I've never heard of it. And I'm sure a lot of students would say the same thing.
Okay.
Just quickly on that point, we were just out filming a video asking students if they even knew what NUS stood for. Few of them did, thankfully. We asked them who the president was. I can tell you 100% of them had no idea who even the president was. And I'm going to take that question just in two sections. Firstly, the checks and balances. I should hope there are checks and balances as to where the money goes. I'm not really sure. Like I said, they signed off their accounts a few years ago saying that their finances were fine. And now suddenly, all of a sudden, they are close to bankruptcy. They've got a £3 million debt. They've got £12 million in pension liabilities. If there are checks and balances, they're not working. Sorry, can you remind me of the second part of the question?
Was that one about the marketing?
The Southern Union.
The one about the Southern University.
Yeah, so what we have at the moment, I mean, really, that part of your question where you said how there needs to be a kind of established kind of block already. I'd love there to be a national union that worked, you know, but unfortunately there isn't one that works. Like I said, we do have the Southern Unions Network, and it's not a formal kind of thing. It's just a kind of meet-up where unions around the South can discuss their issues, mainly because when we discuss issues with NUS, they don't listen, don't act, don't really get a reply most of the times. So we had to kind of get this together. There isn't anything formal, but you can guarantee that 50k is going to be staying right back in Portsmouth. And the Students' Union, which is mandated by you guys, can reinvest that into things that students love, our students love.
So would you say failure of, it's not actually failure of anyone, but it's failure of leadership? The ones representing the university are not able to voice out their opinion.
It's not.
Sorry, George. We're just going to move on to the yes side. If you guys want to respond to the comments that this side gave, and also to answer the question as well.
Yeah, the £50,000. Every campus I've been to that holds a affiliation referendum, it's the same story. I remember it was on a bus during a Brexit referendum as well about money going back to where it wasn't, right? The key thing with that £50,000 is every penny of that £50,000 that's spent is reported back to students' unions. Every single penny is reported back to students' unions at a thing that we call a company law meeting. Happens once a year, similar to, you know how you guys have AGMs in your SU, where every single penny of the money, that affiliation that comes into NUS is reported back to students' unions as to how it's spent. And the key thing is that NUS, similarly to a gym membership, right? You look like you're in much better shape than I am, so I assume you've seen the inside of a gym in the last 12 months. I haven't, right? So it's like a gym membership. You pay for it, but the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. And I'm really disappointed that the officers feel that they've been let down in terms of the response times from NUS. That's responsibility on us to do better. But the issue is that NUS isn't a thing that exists out of nature. It's something that was created by students' unions. On the affiliation fee part of the reform, that £50,000 is being halved, so affiliation fees in a part of our reform process is being halved because we've heard from students' unions that it's too much. Issues around the Southern Unions Conference. In fact, I went to the last Southern Unions Conference meeting. The vast majority of the Southern Unions are actually affiliates of NUS, are affiliated members of NUS and continue to be. So the key thing is, the one thing I would like to leave with everyone is, whenever I go to affiliation referendums, and similarly tonight, there is no alternative to a national voice, right? If you leave, you are only doing a disservice, because in the very beginning, I heard something around join the 13 other students' unions that have disaffiliated. Well, you've got 13 on one side, and you have 538 students' unions on the other side, 538 campuses, higher, further education, colleges, universities, who are all united, not politically, but behind an organisation that when Theresa May wants to make a decision, or Jeremy Corbyn wants to make a decision, or UUK wants to make a decision, they don't call the Southern Unions Conference, they call the National Union of Students. And all you'd be doing is pulling your voice out of that.
Okay, we're going to go back to the no side, but just before we do, if I can remind both sides of the panel that we're here to debate the National Union of Students and not the current political climate in the UK, because I fear that we really will be here all night if we get onto Brexit and the rest of it. So we're not going to talk about political issues. This is a debate on the National Union of Students, and we're going to give 30 seconds to you guys, if you can keep it brief, and then we're going to go back to the audience.
This is how much they don't care about the universities who aren't associated. There are 17 universities who are disaffiliated. He just quoted 13. He doesn't
13
even...
most recently.
13,
That's what the number you gave.
No, I said
sorry,
13
guys,
as well as Surrey, Plymouth, Southampton and Newcastle.
Yeah,
that adds up to 17.
If you can address it to the audience.
And I'm going to give you a bit of Latin.
co-panelists.
For those of you who study politics, you all have heard of ad hominem. The politics of deflection. The first thing he opened with was the lie they put on the big red bus. This isn't about party politics. This isn't about Brexit. This is about what we can do at this university. He tries to divide us. He tries to say, you're not going to do anything with those 13, correction, 17 universities because it's not a national voice. Well, no. Smaller groups with more specific issues always get heard more often. Why do independent MPs get elected to Parliament? Because they stand on small issues and they get heard nationally. You are hearing the politics of lies.
With that, we're going to go back to the audience for questions. So hands up. Yeah, at the back there.
Excuse me. So obviously you were speaking about how you were helping black students to kind of increase educational attainment, but I've never heard.
No.
I can hear you though. It's all right, yeah.
Okay, it is on. I've never heard anything about attempts to get white working class male students to increase their attainment and increase their attendance at uni. I mean, we're about as rare as unicorns, as far as I can tell. I mean, I know one other working class kid at this uni, so, I mean, nice to hear something related to that.
Okay, I'm going to give this side 1 minute to respond, then we'll take in one final very short question for the no side before we go to closing statements.
I think we treat everyone at this university equally, and I personally didn't know about the black attainment gap, and as my colleague Ali brought it up, I was absolutely gobsmacked because I just couldn't believe it. But I can believe it because I'm a white working class woman, and I represent a lot of people in this world. I represent people that are literally born with nothing, including white working class men. But we all come in together at this point, and we need to agree that we live in a predominantly white country and that we look out for others as well. I don't think you're very rare. I think there's a white working class person sat next to you right now, so is that the only white working class person with you at university? Because I would say it's probably about 60% here.
The question I'm talking is that there's an education gap, and that was what I was...
The attainment gap doesn't just count for black students as well, but we can see, because they're a minority, that this is something that we have to improve upon.
Okay, we're going to move on to one final question for the no side. Yep, Ryan at the back.
It's to you in the blazer on the no side, on the other side. You said that at the beginning, you said that the 13 universities which disaffiliated, we could have a Southern partnership, whereas you contradicted yourself just a bit later on, and you said that people with universities with independent voices have stronger views. So your contradiction there, what are you trying to clear up with that?
So the Southern Universities Network is not a collection of all 17 disaffiliated universities.
But you said it was a possibility.
It could be a possibility, of course. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that if we leave the NUS, we're going to form a disaffiliated version of the NUS, because I'm not in a position to do that. I'm a student, just like you. But what I do know is that the NUS is not representing students at a national level, or even at a local level. Once again, let's really question why he says he's been to so many disaffiliation referendums. It's because his job is on the line. He won't get paid if the NUS isn't a job. If it's not there, it's in his best interest for us to keep pumping money into this organisation, pumping and pumping and pumping, with no returns. No returns. In fact, I invite you to come back to me now and tell me what the NUS have done for Portsmouth.
We're going to have to do that in our closing statements, which we're now going to move on to.
Okay.
Since the yes side went first in the beginning, we're going to throw it to the no side. So you're going to have 3 minutes as a group. I would implore you to be as brief as possible. And off you go.
We hear about the politics of division. We hear about the politics of deflection. We hear about the politics of making us separate by what makes us unique. They do not recognise that gay men are oppressed. They tell us our university discriminate against black students when we know this not to be the case. I implore you to do your own research on the NUS, and I implore you to read everything. Maybe even take a look back through some of their previous presidents' tweets. Maybe even take a look through some of the people's tables around here. Take a look at some of their tweets. Because I promise you now, what you will see is a politics of division, a politics of hatred, and a politics of nothing but self-serving bureaucracy. Because that is what the NUS is at its crux. That is what they are doing. They are trying to divide because they feel like it makes them have a purpose. If there is no division amongst students, which here there is very little, there is no purpose for the NUS. Their politics is of division and hatred. Ours is about moving forward as a collective, making sure that students are being represented.
So just to finish up, there's so much more that we as a union can accomplish. There's so much more that we can accomplish in Portsmouth than what the NUS has to offer. I would like to finish with a quote from Eva Jory, who's actually the VP of Liberation and Welfare from NUS. At this current moment, NUS are threatening cuts to FE and PG students, to trans students, to IMTL students, to students from all liberation groups, mature, part-time and parents and carers, as well as the entire welfare zone. you start to wonder who they want the NUS to be for. That's something to take away tonight. The NUS was set up to represent all of us, and as time has gone on, they have represented us as students, wherever we come from, less and less. I fear for what the future holds if we stay affiliated. Where will we end up if we carry on like this?
Okay, George, you have 50 seconds if there's anything you'd care to add.
I don't need to add anything more. I think that's
Sure.
fine, thank you.
Okay, and with that, the yes side have 3 minutes also.
So let's talk about some Portsmouth issues. Number one, I'm going to be really kind of selfish here. We have a totem card. I go in the co-op a lot. We all get that discount. And if we disaffiliate, we ain't going to get that co-op discount anymore. And there are a lot of co-ops in Portsmouth. So I'm just going to appeal to you on the very bottom level on that one, because I feel like it has to be noted somewhere, because they're just saying that totem's a mess. But I don't want to lose my discount. That's the first issue. I just want to say about number two on your points about NUS voted to renew its policy that gay men don't face oppression, because the NUS might be in some kind of form of financial trouble, but when they vote to cut paid liberation campaigners, it doesn't mean we stop fighting for the oppressed. I'm a queer woman. I'm quite outraged that they can't fund certain campaigners anymore.
Could you just
But
read that out?
Ronnie, we're going to let them give their closing statement.
It's not like we stop campaigning if we stop paying for anything that's going on. We're still here. We're still fighting for your rights. And it doesn't matter if the NUS is finding financial difficulty, because we're not jumping ship. I want to bring you to the quote from the trade unionist Bob Crow. It was the anniversary of his death last week, saying, "If you fight, you won't always win. But if you don't fight, you will always lose." This is the point here. We're all in it together, and we just want to stand up for people's rights, and doing that as part of a union is the only way to do it. They have presented no argument on how they're going to campaign as a singular unit, but about national issues and local issues as a disaffiliated union. So you need to stay part of that union with us.
Okay, you have a minute and 15 seconds.
Oh, I have a minute and 15 seconds, okay. I'll come back to the original argument. I suspect there will be people both on the opposing side and in the audience and on the live stream who I won't share political views with, or you may disagree with individual policies of NUS and may think that some policies aren't representative of your views. But it's that idea of NUS as a collective voice, and what you heard earlier from my colleague is the loss of that national voice is deeply, deeply damaging to Portsmouth students. The education sector right now is on the precipice. We've got reviews into student funding, we've got a mental health crisis, we've got a black attainment gap, and that's not me saying it, that's every piece of research coming out of HE saying it. And all of these issues are critical to the lives and the experiences of students at Portsmouth and around the country. So really, the choice before you is whether you're engaged in a movement of 538 students' unions, 7 million students around the country, to actually change the national critical issues that face yourselves and your colleagues and your friends and your students, or whether you regress and you look more inwards. I would hope that we can win back your confidence if you don't have confidence in us now. I would hope that you engage in the reforms so it looks like the future that you would want to see. And I would hope that we can build an NUS together that can meet the challenges of every Portsmouth student on your campus.
And with that, we are out of time. If I can get a round of applause for our panellists, ladies and gentlemen. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to our union staff for hosting this event, and to every one of you for coming along. And just to remind you that you'll be able to vote between the 18th and 21st of March on whether or not we should affiliate with the NUS, and that the results will be on the 21st of March at 6 p.m. The link you need is www.upsu.net/referendum. And I would urge you all, please do vote, because this is a very important issue, and hopefully either one of our sides here tonight will have convinced you which way to vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you.